Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So you're seeing Libya now becoming perhaps an example of the Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939, when you had the fascist powers, Italy and Germany, intervening on one side, the Soviets on the other, and of course the British hypocritically and the French enforcing an arms embargo, which hurt the loyalists, right? hurt the Spanish Republic to the advantage of the fascists, because the British did not want the fascists defeated in Spain at that point. So we don't need to follow that comparison too far, but simply the idea that you're now seeing Libya polarize the world to some extent into the underlying divisions or blocks that are there. So the pro-democracy forces turn out to be the neo-colonialist counter-revolutionary forces. An interesting example, a precursor of Libya, we should look back to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka in the spring of 2009, events culminating in May of 2009. You'll remember, we followed it. The Tamil Tigers, LTTE, Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, were the CIA MI6 secret army for the destabilization of Sri Lanka, and they killed hundreds of thousands of people over many, many years. When Sri Lanka was finally in a position to crush and end this civil war, we saw Miliband and the French Kouchner, the foreign minister, screaming that there had to be a ceasefire to protect civilians and to protect, to protect the Tamil Tigers, because they wanted to keep this peace on the board. That was also an attack on China. That was one of the string of pearls, Sri Lanka being one of the string of pearls that the Chinese had been fashioning across the Indian Ocean as a kind of series of way stations, coaling stations, we would have said 100 years ago, for their ships on the way to Africa to bring back the natural resources for the Chinese economy. So today it's the Al-Qaeda forces in Benghazi, Darna, and Tobruk. Back then, it was the Sri Lankan government. Notice now the European Union and others, especially Ban Ki-moon of the United Nations, are talking about war crimes prosecutions against the government of Sri Lanka, and also in theory against the rebels, the terrorists. Remember, no state can be an aggressor on its own territory. The United Nations has no reason to meddle and interfere in the internal affairs of sovereign states. The United Nations should butt out of Sri Lanka, butt out of Libya, and so forth. We've also got the model of mission creep that didn't happen. This is the 50th anniversary this past week of the Bay of Pigs. And remember, the CIA said to Kennedy, we've got an unbeatable secret army. We're going to go in there. There'll be a mass rebellion against Castro. So they send in these discredited anti-Castro Cubans to the Playa Giron. Didn't work. And at that point, Alan Dulles goes to Kennedy and says, we need airstrikes. We need the Marines. Kennedy says, no, and by the way, you're fired. That's presidential leadership. Obama, confronted with the same thing, says, yes, airstrikes, yes, Predator drones, and soon it will be yes to the Marines. Stories about shiploads of Marines off the coast there in the Mediterranean, ready to go in. Well, see what you find. Remember Somalia. It seemed like a cakewalk. It's always a cakewalk before you do it. But they have real guns with real bullets, and the actual quality of the weaponry may be improving. If Debka is right, maybe they're getting some things that are more sophisticated from this alleged China, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Serbia bloc. Today was supposedly Great Friday in Syria. I guess they got embarrassed with that Dignity Friday because it made their connections to Zbigniew Brzezinski too obvious. We're told that there are things going on in Syria. The emergency law has been lifted, but the crackdown continues. Now, the Syrian government says that there are armed gangs, and they show pictures of armed gangs, and I think everybody recognizes that there are armed gunmen in the middle of this. And if there are armed gunmen, of course, then what kind of a police department is going to stand by and let armed gunmen, provocateurs, shoot? Those could be assassins from the Muslim Brotherhood. Instead, naturally, Hillary Clinton protests that the crackdown against the armed gunmen is happening. What you're seeing also is the beginning of the breakup of Syria, huh? We've seen Sudan carved, Serbia carved, Yemen being carved, Libya being carved. How about Syria? Now the CIA speaking tubes are saying Assad cracks down. This will lead to a civil war between the Sunni majority and the Alawite minority, the Alawite religious minority, to which, of course, the Assad family notoriously belongs. So the idea here is you'd come up with Syria minus Kurdistan minus the Alawite enclave. You'd have a rump Syria under some kind of a puppet government, no ally for Iran, no backup for Hezbollah, no Russian naval station, and a terror regime of the Muslim Brotherhood. We're told by the Washington Post that Iran is helping Syria with some equipment, but this is nothing compared to what the U.S. is sending in. The WikiLeaks report that $6 million went from the State Department to Syria is, of course, a limited hangout. If you're looking for proof that the WikiLeaks is a limited hangout, that's it. It's not 6 million WikiLeaks. It's closer to 60 million, and the budget for the Arab Spring is certainly in excess of 600 million when you put it all together, right? All the different commands, the NED, the CIA, AFRICOM, Cybercom, all those brigades of mercenary cyber trolls across the world. The other angle is Syria, the destabilization of Syria is an attack on Turkey. Again, we've argued that the Yemen destabilization is an attack on Saudi Arabia. The Bahrain destabilization is an attack on the royal family, trying to get them to drop their limitations on the use of the fleet base, but it's also an attack on Saudi Arabia. Now, the destabilization of Syria, a clear attack on Turkey. When you had Turkey and Brazil a year ago attempting to mediate the Iranian nuclear question, you saw rage and freakouts in the State Department, Foggy Bottom and Langley, foaming at the mouth. So now this is an attempted payback against Turkey. Erdogan, the constructive and positive Prime Minister of Turkey, is reportedly worried that if Syria descends into civil war, that will have immediate implications for Turkey. And, of course, that will come through the Kurds. And the U.S. is undoubtedly readying the Kurds from northern Iraq to stoke up the rebellion inside Turkey, if this can be brought along. So these are the singing tomorrows of the people power coup and democracy. In Egypt, the U.S. media has gradually understood that now the Muslim Brotherhood is going to win the September elections big time. The Golden Youth, these poor characters, most of them dupes, many of them well-meaning, but most of them absolutely dupes, at least at the time in February. The Golden Youth have now broken with the Muslim Brotherhood over the pace of the elections and other issues. You've also got increasing attacks on Coptic Christians. Remember that illusion that because the Copts and the Muslims were holding hands in Tahrir Square, it meant that centuries of religious tension were gone? No, they're not gone. And if you put the Muslim Brotherhood into power, you're going to get a crackdown on the 10% of the population who are Coptic Christians, but of course the U.S. doesn't care about this. The Coptic Christian governor of one of the provinces of Egypt is under heavy attack. So the worldwide alliance between the CIA and the Muslim Brotherhood is rolling along. You've also got splits engendered elsewhere. We're told that inside Hamas, there is a split between a pro-Assad faction and an anti-Assad faction, and that the anti-Assad faction are the mullahs. Interesting. Also in Iran this week, we had a kind of a clash between the Ayatollah, who is the supreme leader, and President Ahmadinejad. And remember, the positive thing about President Ahmadinejad is that he represents in some way an echo of Nasserism. He's a reforming general who takes over the government and tries to make his base into the downtrodden, underprivileged elements of the population. So all of this going on. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio.